I'm a 33-year-old single father, raising my 10-year-old son on my own. I work two jobs to keep things going, weekdays at a warehouse and weekends delivering groceries. It's not glamorous, but it keeps the bills paid and food on the table. My boy's everything to me. He's smart, kind, and always trying to act older than he is, especially since he sees how much I work. He's never asked for much, but for the past year he's been talking about how badly he wants a PlayStation. 8 months ago, I made a plan. I decided I was going to surprise him with one for his birthday. It meant tightening the budget even more than usual. I stopped buying coffee on the way to work, canceled streaming services, and told myself I'd wait on new clothes. Even the brakes on my car, which were starting to grind a little, got pushed to the side. Every dollar I could spare went into a small envelope. I kept hidden in a drawer under old insurance papers. Bit by bit, it added up. I didn't tell anyone at first. It felt good having this one secret goal that was just mine. But about 2 months ago, I slipped. My sister had called, and we were just talking about random things. I casually mentioned that I was saving up to surprise my son with something special. She pushed a little, and I mentioned it was a PlayStation. I didn't think much of it. She's my sister after all. She lives about 20 minutes away with her 9-year-old son and doesn't work. She's fully supported by her parents. They've always doted on her. Growing up, she could do no wrong in their eyes. I've never really had that kind of support. When I told them I was going to be a dad, the first thing they said was, "How are you going to afford that?" Meanwhile, my sister gets praised for being there for her child, even though she hasn't had a job in years, and drops him off at our parents' house more often than not. Our relationship has been distant for years. Not hostile, just cold. She's one of those people who only reaches out when she needs something or wants to brag. Still, I never thought she'd do what she did. I finally bought the PlayStation a few weeks before my son's birthday, paid in full, in cash. Brand new, still sealed. I brought it home, made sure it worked, then boxed it back up, and tucked it in the top of the closet. I imagined the look on my son's face when he unwrapped it. He'd be so happy. I'd saved for so long to make that moment happen. Then one day, my sister stopped by unannounced. She said she was in the area and wanted to check in. I didn't think twice when she asked to use the bathroom or looked around my place a little. She asked about the PlayStation, just a casual "do you still have it" kind of question. I told her I'd hidden it, just in case my son went snooping. She laughed and said she'd love to see it sometime. I said maybe, and we moved on. A few days later, I had a strange feeling. My son was at school, and I was home for a rare weekday afternoon. I decided to check on the gift. The closet door looked normal, but the box, gone. Completely gone. I pulled down every bin, every shoebox, even looked under the bed and inside the laundry basket. Nothing. I turned my place upside down. I even checked the trunk of the car, though I knew I hadn't taken it out. That's when it hit me. I called my sister, no small talk, just straight to the point. I asked her if she'd been in my closet. She didn't deny it. She said she had taken the PlayStation without asking and gave it to her son, assuming I wouldn't mind. Just like that. According to her, he'd been struggling emotionally and needed something good to lift his spirits. She thought I'd understand because, after all, he's family too. I couldn't even process what I was hearing. I didn't give her permission. She didn't ask. She just decided that her son deserved the gift I had spent months saving for. When I reminded her that it was for my son's birthday, she brushed it off, saying kids that age don't remember gifts anyway, and that it was more important that her boy didn't feel left out. No apology. No offer to return it. She acted like she was being considerate by informing me after the fact, even though she hadn't asked beforehand. I stood in the middle of my apartment for a long time after that. The empty closet shelf was still open, the dust outline of the box still there. I had spent 8 months planning a single moment for my son, one moment of surprise and joy that was now gone, taken like it meant nothing. I knew then that this wasn't just about a video game console. It was about boundaries, respect, and what people think they're allowed to take just because you share a last name. That same evening, I left work early, drove straight to my sister's house, and parked across the street. Her living room window was wide open, lights on, blinds halfway drawn. I could see her son sitting cross-legged on the rug, holding the controller, eyes locked on the TV screen. There it was. The PlayStation I had saved 8 months to buy. Already set up, already being treated like it belonged to him. I walked up and rang the doorbell. She opened the door just enough to peek out. I told her I wasn't here to argue. I just wanted what was mine. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her, said her son was inside and I was too late. According to her, taking it back now would emotionally wreck him, and I'd be tearing apart a child's happiness. I told her it wasn't hers to give away, that she had no right, and I wasn't leaving empty-handed. She didn't flinch, just said I was overreacting, turned and shut the door in my face. I stood there for a minute, then headed to my parents' house. I hadn't even told them yet. I figured, if nothing else, they'd at least agree that what she did was wrong. I was wrong about that too. My mother looked confused at first, then asked why I didn't just let the kids take turns with it for a while. My father said it was just a toy, and maybe it was a sign I was working too much and needed to refocus on family instead of material things. He actually said that boys didn't need video games. They needed chores and sunlight. I didn't stay long. I left before I said something I'd regret. Once I got home, I pulled out my file drawer and found the receipt from the electronics store. I printed off my bank statements and screenshots of the messages we exchanged when I told her about the PlayStation. Every piece of evidence I had, I stacked into a folder. I drove to the police station that night and filed a theft report. The officer on duty took down the details, asked if I had proof, and made copies of everything. He said they'd send someone by her place to speak with her, but warned me up front that because it involved family, the situation could get complicated. The next afternoon, a pair of officers stopped by her house for a courtesy visit. As part of the initial report filing, she told them it was a private family dispute and that she didn't steal anything, she just repurposed a shared family resource for a child in need. One of the officers called me afterward and explained they wouldn't be able to retrieve the item. I'd have to take her to small claims court if I wanted a formal resolution. They logged the complaint but wouldn't intervene. Later that evening, I got a string of messages from her, long paragraphs accusing me of trying to tear the family apart over a toy. She said I was selfish, that I didn't understand what her son was going through, and that I was punishing her for needing help. I didn't even finish reading them. I blocked her number and email, permanently, and didn't respond to any messages forwarded by others. I didn't want to hear another word from her. My son's birthday came 2 days later. I still made a cake, still wrapped the few small things I could afford, a couple of books, a board game, and some candy. He smiled, thanked me, and tried to act excited, but I could see it. The bounce in his step wasn't there. He didn't know what he was supposed to be getting, but he knew something felt off. We played the board game after dinner, just the two of us at the kitchen table. He laughed a few times, made a few jokes, but it didn't last. After he went to bed, I cleaned up the plates, turned off the lights, and sat alone with the last slice of cake on a paper plate. I stared at the spot in the living room where the gift should have been waiting, wrapped and glowing with anticipation. I knew I wasn't just dealing with stolen property. I was dealing with someone who believed she could take whatever she wanted and count on family ties to excuse it. I'd worked hard, sacrificed things I needed, and planned every step so my son could have one good memory on his birthday. She didn't just take a toy. She took that moment, and everyone who defended her was telling me, in their own way, that my son didn't matter as much. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't let this slide. Not for pride, not for revenge, but because one day my son would ask me why it happened. And I needed to be able to tell him I stood up for him. That when someone crossed a line, I didn't just roll over. I took action. Because sometimes the only way to protect something important is to show you're willing to fight for it. The following Monday, I scheduled a consultation with a small claims attorney. I brought in all the paperwork I had, bank statements, the store receipt, screenshots of texts where I mentioned the PlayStation, and even the police report number. After going through everything, the attorney confirmed I had a solid case. It wouldn't be quick, but it was winnable. She gave me a folder with all the forms I'd need to file, and walked me through the next steps. I filed the paperwork that same week. The court date hadn't been set yet, but the process had officially started. I organized every document into a binder, one section for receipts, one for communication, one for the police report. I even started jotting down a timeline of events so I wouldn't miss any detail later in front of a judge. A few days after I filed, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months called me. He told me my sister had been talking about the situation at a family get-together, twisting the story into something else entirely. According to her, I abandoned family values over electronics and was trying to humiliate her to feel powerful. She couldn't message me directly anymore, but she found her way back through other people. Soon after, I started getting messages from other relatives. Some told me I should just let it go. Others asked me to think about how my actions were tearing the family apart. A few even told me to consider what it was doing to the kids. None of them asked for my side. They had already decided who they were going to believe. I didn't argue. I just took screenshots of every message and sent them to my attorney. Then I blocked each sender one by one. I had no interest in explaining myself to people who only saw what they wanted to see. At work, I pulled my manager aside and gave him a heads up about the court case. He was more understanding than I expected. He approved a flexible schedule if I needed to attend any hearings or legal appointments. That small gesture made a huge difference, especially since I was still working weekends on top of my regular shifts. One evening, while I was restocking shelves during my grocery delivery shift, a coworker overheard part of a phone call I had with my attorney. When things slowed down later, he came over and asked if I still needed a PlayStation. Turns out, he had an older one he was planning to sell. It wasn't brand new, but he said it was in good condition and came with a working controller. I checked the model and tested it before handing over the cash. It wasn't the original gift I planned, but it was close enough. I brought it home, cleaned it up, and set it up on our living room TV. When my son came home from school the next day, it was sitting there waiting for him, powered on with the home screen glowing. He dropped his backpack right at the door and ran toward it. His face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. He grabbed the controller, spun around, and shouted that I was the best dad in the world. I didn't explain how or where it came from. I just let him have that moment. He played for hours. I made popcorn, turned off the overhead lights, and let the evening unfold like it was supposed to all along. No interruptions, no drama. The next day, I installed a small locking cabinet in my bedroom closet. I had a few things worth keeping secure, important documents, spare cash, and now, anything new I bought for my son. I didn't want to risk something like this happening again. That cabinet became my peace of mind. Even though my son finally had something to enjoy, I didn't drop the court case. This wasn't about holding a grudge. It was about boundaries. My sister crossed a line and acted like it didn't matter, because we were related. I wanted her to see that just because someone is family doesn't mean they get a free pass. As the pressure to drop the case grew louder, I tuned it out. I didn't respond to anyone trying to guilt me into silence. I didn't engage in any arguments. I just stayed on course. Theft is theft, whether it happens at work, in a store, or inside your own family. There's a big difference between letting things go and letting people get away with them. I made up my mind. I wasn't backing down. The court notice arrived in the mail with the date stamped clearly. 3 weeks from now. The small claims hearing was officially scheduled. I cleared space on the dining table and laid everything out in piles. The binder I'd been keeping now had dividers for receipts, screenshots, the police report, and a timeline of events from the day I first told my sister about the PlayStation to the day I filed the claim. While organizing, I remembered my neighbor had seen my sister outside my place the day the console disappeared. I walked over and explained what was going on, asking if she remembered anything specific. She recalled seeing my sister's car parked by the curb that afternoon, and noticed her carrying a medium-sized box when she left. She offered to write a signed statement for the court. I picked it up 2 days later and added it to the case file. Later that week, my attorney forwarded me an unexpected message. A former coworker of my sister's had reached out after a mutual family member mentioned the case during a get-together. She claimed that back when they worked together, my sister had taken office supplies and tech equipment home without returning them. While that information wasn't directly related to my case, my attorney said it could show a pattern of behavior. We kept the details limited, sticking to what was relevant while still building a clear picture. That Friday, I found out through another relative that my parents had hosted a dinner the night before. I hadn't been invited. Apparently, the whole thing turned into a defense session for my sister. The story floating around now was that I had overreacted to a small misunderstanding and was causing division to assert control. One cousin said that during the dinner, the phrase "he's always been difficult" was repeated more than once by multiple relatives. Not everyone bought into it. One aunt called me privately. She didn't agree with how I was being treated and said this wasn't the first time my sister had gotten away with something, while others were told to just let it go. She offered to testify if needed, but I told her just knowing she saw the truth was enough. I didn't want to drag anyone else into it unless absolutely necessary. The court date was getting closer, and I wanted my son away from the stress. A friend of mine had a small family camping trip planned for the weekend and offered to bring my son along. I packed his bag, double-checked everything, and dropped him off Friday afternoon. He was excited to go, especially since their youngest was his age, and they got along well. That same night, after getting home from work, I walked out to the parking lot and noticed something off about the car. The driver's side door had the word "Trader" scratched into the paint. It wasn't deep, but it was visible. I stood there for a while, then drove straight to the local station to report it. I didn't accuse anyone directly, just explained the context. There was a court case, it involved family, and tensions were high. The officer logged the report and suggested I consider a security camera setup. It wouldn't undo the damage, but it might stop something worse from happening. I spent part of Saturday researching home surveillance systems. By the end of the day, I'd installed a basic 2-camera kit, one facing the front door and one pointed at the driveway. It wasn't fancy, but it had motion alerts and backed up the footage online. I also bought a lockable storage bin for the trunk of my car and made sure the dashcam was working properly. The rest of the weekend, I stayed in. I cleaned the apartment, finished organizing the court binder, and printed 2 extra copies just in case. I laid out my shirt and slacks for the hearing, tested my alarm clock 3 times, and ran through my opening summary until it sounded natural. No drama, no shouting, just facts. One person stole something. That person refused to return it. The law existed for a reason. I wasn't stepping into that courtroom angry. I was stepping in ready. On the day of the hearing, I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early. I wore the same pressed shirt I'd set aside during prep, carried my binder in one hand, and a backup copy of everything in the other. I checked in with the clerk, waited outside the small courtroom, and reviewed the timeline one last time. 10 minutes past the scheduled time, my sister walked in. No apology, no urgency. She took a seat across the aisle like she'd been inconvenienced. When our case was called, we both stepped forward. I laid my binder on the table as instructed and handed over the documents the judge asked to see. She gave us both a few minutes to summarize our side. My sister tried to play it off like a misunderstanding, that it was just a family situation blown out of proportion. She said she thought it was a shared gift and that she didn't mean to cause any problems. The judge asked if she had any proof, messages, receipts, anything at all. She said she hadn't brought anything. I passed forward the signed statement from my neighbor, confirming she saw my sister at my apartment the day the PlayStation went missing. The judge read it carefully. She flipped through the bank records, receipts, and messages where I clearly stated the console was for my son's birthday. The facts were lined up, time-stamped, and in order. It didn't take long. The judge ruled in my favor and ordered that my sister either return the PlayStation in full working condition within 10 business days, or pay me the total cost, including court fees. My sister didn't say a word. She grabbed her purse and left the courtroom in silence. Her expression was tight, but she didn't argue. A few days later, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a check from her. It was short, $20 less than the amount the judge had ordered. I didn't call her, didn't send a message. I just notified the court. They logged it as an incomplete payment and sent out a formal notice of non-compliance on her record. Not long after, I heard the doorbell ring. A mutual cousin stood there with a box in his hands. He didn't say anything, just handed it over and walked off. It was the PlayStation. The original one I'd bought, scratched, covered in fingerprints. It looked like it had been dragged through weeks of heavy use and barely wiped down before being dumped at my door. I opened the lid and checked it. The console powered on, but I didn't even plug it into the TV. The next morning, I drove it to a local children's shelter and donated it. Someone else's kid might not care about the wear. Someone else's kid might just be happy to have it. Later that week, my son came home quieter than usual. I asked how school was, and he said some kids had started making comments. Turns out, his cousin, the one whose mom took the PlayStation, had been telling classmates that I dragged the family to court over just a misunderstanding. A few others were repeating it, laughing in hallways and making jabs during lunch. That evening, I sat down with him at the kitchen table. I explained what happened clearly and simply. I didn't mention my sister by name or speak badly about anyone. I told him someone had taken something from us, and we followed the right path to get it back. Not to hurt them, but because it was the right thing to do. I told him standing up for yourself isn't always popular, but it's necessary. I asked for his phone and blocked his cousin's number. I didn't want any more messages, calls, or side-channel bullying coming from that household. I made a note to check in with his teachers at the next parent meeting. With the court part finally over and the console returned in name only, I shifted focus back to my son's routine. We built a simple after-school schedule with screen time, homework, and time at the park. I signed him up for a local weekend gaming club so he could meet kids outside his school. The PlayStation drama had run its course, but the lesson it left behind still mattered. From here on out, we were protecting our space, our peace, and our time together. No matter who tried to step over the line again. After the court sent a follow-up notice for the missing $20, I got the full amount within a week. I used it to upgrade my son's gaming setup. He'd been talking about a specific wireless headset and a couple of games his friends played online, so I picked those up along with a new controller. By the time he got home from school, everything was already connected and charging. When he walked through the door and saw the setup, he just froze. Then he dropped his bag and jumped straight onto the couch. He spent hours that evening exploring the new games, testing out the headset, and showing me everything. I played a few rounds with him badly, but he laughed the whole time. That console wasn't just something to play with anymore. It had become something we earned together, and it stayed between us. 2 days later, my phone rang. My parents' number popped up. I answered. They had heard about the ruling and weren't happy. They said I'd taken things too far, that I embarrassed the family and should have handled it quietly. I told them I wasn't going to defend myself. Not again. When they started bringing up my sister's intentions, I hung up. About a week after that, an envelope arrived from a local law office. Inside was a cease and desist letter accusing me of slandering my sister. It was full of vague language claiming I had told damaging stories about her to multiple people. I didn't waste time. I forwarded the letter to my own lawyer, who sent a formal response requesting proof and clarification. None came. 3 days later, I got a short email from my attorney saying the other side had withdrawn. The sister's lawyer had ended representation, citing an inability to communicate with their client. That chapter closed itself without much help from me. The following weekend, I got a message from another cousin inviting me and my son to a child's birthday party at a nearby park. I checked the guest list and saw my sister's name included. I replied with a polite decline. I didn't explain why, didn't mention court, didn't make it a scene, just said we wouldn't be able to make it and left it there. That night, during dinner, my son brought up something he'd heard at school. One of the cousins had told their classmates they deserved the PlayStation more because they didn't have one. My son didn't ask questions, he just repeated it like it didn't matter. I told him that people sometimes say things without knowing the whole story, and it's not worth giving those words any power. Over the next week, I went through his contacts and started cleaning up. I removed numbers for extended family who had been tied up in the situation, either by spreading rumors or pushing their own version of events. My goal wasn't to isolate him, just to keep his space calm. He didn't argue, just nodded and moved on. One evening as I was taking out the trash, I noticed someone standing across the street, near the far end of the apartment building. They weren't doing anything, just standing there facing the building. When they noticed me, they walked off without saying a word. I didn't recognize them from the complex or the neighborhood. The next morning, I called a locksmith and had the front and balcony locks replaced. It cost more than I wanted to spend that week, but it was worth the peace of mind. I also moved the indoor camera to face the hallway in case anything else happened near the door. With all that in the rear view, I stopped explaining myself. I didn't respond to subtle jabs from extended relatives. I didn't take calls unless I knew they were from trusted numbers. My focus shifted completely to my own household. My son, my job, our space. If someone wanted to stay in our lives, they'd have to bring peace with them. Not guilt, not drama, not stories. We spent the next weekend building shelves together. He painted his own labels for the games, and we added wall hooks for the controllers. It wasn't just about the PlayStation anymore. It was about having a home where no one else's decisions could take something away from us again. Midway through the school week, I got a call from the vice principal's office. There had been an incident involving my son during lunch. A group of students had surrounded him in the cafeteria, mocking him with lines like your dad sues people over toys and family means nothing to snitches. One of the kids involved was my sister's son. I picked him up that afternoon. On the way home, he admitted this wasn't the first time it had happened. For weeks, there had been small digs, comments from classmates, and whispering behind his back. He tried to shrug it off, but now it was spreading. More kids were joining in. It was getting harder to avoid. The next morning, I met with the school administrators. I laid everything out, the court case, the fallout, and the role certain kids were playing. I didn't name family members, just gave the school context. They reviewed their own incident logs and confirmed there had been multiple complaints filed about verbal teasing. They promised to monitor things more closely and make sure staff were more present during unstructured periods like recess and lunch. Even with that in place, my son became hesitant about going to school. He dragged his feet in the mornings, took longer to get ready, and asked more often if he could stay home just for today. I scheduled a meeting with the school counselor and requested weekly sessions. They agreed to help him process things and work on rebuilding his confidence. To give him more support outside the classroom, I started looking into after-school clubs. I found a small robotics group and a weekend art class held at the local community center. He liked both ideas. I signed him up for both and rearranged my delivery shifts so I could handle pickup without stress. That same week, a cousin I hadn't heard from since the court case messaged me. He started with an apology, said he didn't realize the full story back then and regretted taking my sister's side. He said things didn't sit right anymore and wanted to share something that might explain why the family tension kept escalating. He sent me a series of screenshots from a private family group chat I had never been part of. In the messages, my sister called me toxic, claimed I was obsessed with revenge, and said I manipulated the court system to make her look bad. She told everyone I ruined her son's mental health and that I was dangerous to be around. A few people in the chat agreed with her, while others stayed silent. I didn't reply to the cousin's message. I just thanked him for the screenshots and left it at that. Then I opened the extended family chat I was part of, and quietly left the group. No message, no drama, just gone. I deleted the contact list connected to it, and blocked a few numbers while I was at it. The following day, when my son came home from school and unpacked his bag, he found a small folded note stuffed between his books. On it, in uneven handwriting, someone had written, "Your dad steals from his own family." He showed it to me without saying a word. I called the school and asked them to address the handling of personal belongings. They agreed to speak with the staff and review camera footage near the cubby area. I didn't press charges or request suspension. I just wanted it on record that things were getting worse, not better. That night, I sat down and started researching elementary schools in nearby neighborhoods. I filtered for smaller class sizes, better student support services, and higher satisfaction scores. I called a few offices the next morning to ask about enrollment windows and transfer requirements. A couple had openings for mid-semester transitions. It was clear the bullying wasn't going away just because adults were watching. The damage was spreading beyond words. It was creeping into how my son saw school, how he saw friendships, and how he moved through each day. Fixing that wouldn't happen in the same place it was allowed to start. I bookmarked 2 schools with solid reputations and began reviewing their district lines. If it meant moving, I'd make it happen. Whatever it took to get him back to a place where he didn't have to look over his shoulder just to get through a lunch period. I started the housing search the same day I confirmed there were 2 good schools with open spots. I focused on quieter districts with better teacher-to-student ratios and strong parent reviews. After making a list, I called a real estate agent who worked in the area and set up 3 tours for the weekend. Most of the units were modest, but I didn't need anything fancy, just safe, clean, and close to the school. My employer had already approved a partial remote schedule after I explained I might be moving for my son's well-being. As long as I maintained hours and responded promptly, they didn't care where I worked from. That flexibility opened up more options. I could now look a little farther out, where the neighborhoods were calmer and rent prices weren't inflated by the school district. By the 3rd tour, I found a small 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a quiet building across from a park. The school was 5 minutes away. There was a community pool, a library within walking distance, and the area had minimal traffic. I filled out the application, sent in the paperwork, and was approved within 3 days. After I got the move-in date, I sat down with my son to explain everything. I showed him pictures of the school, the park, and the room that would be his. He didn't hesitate. He said he wanted to go. He was ready to leave the name-calling, the whispers, and everything that came with it. We started packing that weekend. We went room by room, taking only what we needed, and letting go of anything tied to stress or arguments. Old notes, school handouts, broken toys, we tossed them. While clearing out a storage box in the hallway closet, I found a folded piece of construction paper from years ago, a drawing of the 2 of us playing video games together, made in crayon. It reminded me what this had all been about from the beginning. I gave our new address to only 2 people, 1 close friend and my boss. That was it. No extended family, no cousins, no mutuals. I didn't want my sister or anyone tied to her finding us or showing up uninvited. The night before the move, around 10, I heard banging on the front door. I checked the peephole. My sister was outside, pacing and yelling loudly enough to draw attention from nearby neighbors. She wasn't holding anything, just shouting at the door, demanding I come out and talk. I didn't respond. I stood upstairs behind the window curtain and watched as she finally looked up, saw the security camera, and left. I saved the footage and uploaded it to cloud storage, then filed a non-emergency police report online to document the visit. I didn't press charges, just added it to the growing list of incidents in case something else happened. We left before sunrise. I loaded the last box into the trunk, locked the door one final time, and dropped the keys in the return box. The drive to the new place was quiet. When we pulled into the lot, my son leaned forward in his seat and stared out the window at the building. The apartment was still empty when we arrived, but clean. The air smelled like fresh paint. We unloaded slowly, starting with his things first. He picked where his bed would go, unpacked his game console and posters, and helped me stock the kitchen with groceries. No loud knocks, no sudden messages. Just quiet. His first day at the new school came 2 days later. He wore his favorite sneakers, packed his own lunch, and didn't look back when I dropped him off. When I picked him up in the afternoon, he got in the car smiling. He said no one stared. No one asked weird questions. No one even knew his name until the teacher called roll. That evening, a knock came at our new door. It was a neighbor kid holding a controller. He asked if my son wanted to play. They spent the next 3 hours gaming, trading tips, and yelling across the living room like they'd known each other for months. For the first time in what felt like forever, the place felt like a home instead of a battleground. No chaos waiting on the other side of the door. No comments lingering in a hallway. Just peace, finally stretching wide enough for both of us to breathe. A few weeks after we settled into the new apartment, a letter showed up in the mailbox. It had been forwarded from our old address. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar. Inside was a short note from my parents. They asked me to end the silence, to be the bigger person, and to come back to the family for the sake of peace. They wrote that families don't stay divided forever, and hoped I'd eventually see that nobody's perfect. I read it once and put it in a drawer. The message was the same as always: ignore the damage, move on quietly, keep the peace at any cost. But peace built on guilt wasn't peace at all. I didn't write back. That weekend, my son and I built a gaming corner in the living room. We moved the TV stand into a corner nook, added 2 beanbag chairs, wall-mounted a couple of shelves for games, and made a handmade sign with construction paper that read our space. We hung it above the screen with pushpins. The setup was simple, but it was all ours. The next afternoon, 2 of his new friends came over. They dropped their backpacks in the hallway, kicked off their shoes, and jumped right into a multiplayer game. My son laughed so hard at one point, he dropped his controller. No side glances, no awkward questions. Just kids being kids. Later that week, a neighbor knocked on our door and invited us to a neighborhood barbecue. I brought bottled drinks and helped set up chairs. The backyard had string lights, a grill running full speed, and folding tables covered in food. We met a father and son duo who also loved gaming. While the kids played in the grass, the adults swapped stories and exchanged numbers. Plans were made for future game nights. For the first time in a long while, we felt like part of something again. Then another letter arrived, this time from the courthouse. It was a final notice stating my sister had never paid the remaining $20 from the original judgment. It sat on my desk for a full day before I called my attorney. I told her to drop it. Reopening everything just to chase $20 wasn't worth the time, energy, or the risk of giving anyone an excuse to restart the drama. With that, the case was officially closed. I spent the evening going through my laptop and phone, deleting everything tied to the ordeal. Screenshots, voicemails, emails, even the scanned court documents. I emptied the recycle bin and logged out of the backup account I used for evidence. No more bookmarks, no more saved threads, just gone. When my son's next birthday rolled around, I kept it simple. I picked up a newly released game he'd been talking about and tucked it into a small gift bag. Alongside it, I placed a handwritten note. Nothing fancy, just a few words about how proud I was of him and how far we'd come together. He opened it after dinner. He smiled, nodded, and said, "This is perfect. It's just us now." That night, after he fell asleep with the game still running on pause, I sat down with my laptop and updated my will. I reviewed every section, made sure my custody documents were current, and added explicit instructions about guardianship in the event something happened to me. The people who caused us harm would never have a say in my son's future. Once it was done, I saved the file, closed the folder, and backed it up in a secure drive. But more than that, I closed the chapter emotionally. I wasn't going to carry the bitterness any further. There wouldn't be another confrontation, another phone call, another moment spent defending what should have been obvious all along. This story didn't end with a family reunion. It didn't end with revenge. It ended with silence, the good kind. The kind that comes when the shouting fades, the doors stay closed, and the road ahead is quiet enough to walk without looking back. No one won. But we found something better, a reset, a space of our own, and a chance to build something new on our terms.
Some bridges really can't be rebuilt after being burned that thoroughly. If you made it through this family disaster, consider subscribing, because, like I said, I read stories just like these every single day. Take care, and I will see you in the next video.